Merry Christmas, all my wonderful Yuletide fans from the VC Angel Critiquer. I'm afraid the Top 10 Steven Universe episodes video is gonna have to wait a bit in favor of my Christmas review. So since this is my Christmas review, you may be wondering why I'm wearing a shepherd's hat instead of my usual Santa hat. Well, this year I've decided to review something that focuses a bit more on the true meaning of Christmas. A story I've actually wanted to do a comparison of for a really freaking long time now. It's the story of a Christmas pageant with a comedically disastrous production, but in the end, changed the hearts of all those involved and reminded them of the true meaning of Christmas. Yeah, like hell YouTube would actually let me review a Charlie Brown Christmas without getting taken down. No, this is actually going to be a review of a little story called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever.
Beth Bradley's got two major problems. First, she happens to be classmates with the Herdmans, the absolute worst children on the face of the earth. Seriously, the Herdmans are so terrible, they almost make Eric Cartman look like a saint by comparison. They lie, they steal, they smoke, they drink, and if you provoke them, the most humane retaliation you can expect is for them to grow up plants in your frickin' ear. No, I am not shirting you, they literally do that to one kid. Oh yeah, since I'm reviewing something Christian-based again, I've decided I'll respect to use good place censorship for this review, like with my comparison of Rack, Shack, and Benny. And as you can imagine, the little shirts are feared and despised by almost the entire town, including their own mom, who works a late shift just so she can have as little interaction with them as possible. And second, since the usual director of the church Christmas pageant got into an incident and is on medical leave, her mother Grace has graciously decided to live up to her name and volunteer to be the director. And yeah, a simple church pageant put on by some kids may not sound like a huge thing to stress over, but to this town, the church Christmas pageant is basically the equivalent of the Super Bowl. So it's a huge pressure on her mom's hands, and if she fails, then young Beth's reputation will also be kaput. So yeah, those problems both sound pretty bad, don't they? Well, things go from bad to worse when both conflicts decide to form a fusion like in Steven Universe. Namely, when the Herdmans come to church one day just for the free snacks, they decide to try their luck with a career in theater and manage to successfully audition for all the prominent roles. By which I of course mean intimidate the living shirt out of the other auditionees to wipe out the competition and make them Grace's only available candidates. The community is naturally mortified that these kids who could very well be the Antichrists are not only in this pageant, but also have the lead roles, and everyone expects this pageant to bomb harder than Max and Leo intended for Springtime for Hitler to. But despite the huge pressure and angry parents on her back, Grace is determined to make this the best Christmas pageant ever, even with the Herdmans. But young Beth is skeptical since the Herdmans have no hearts at all. Or maybe they do. So at first glance, the story made us sound like the cliche jerk learns to be nice through the true meaning of Christmas premise, something that's the furthest thing from new and original for a Christmas themed story. But this story is neat in that it adds a layer that's not often explored with this type of story that we'll discuss later. And I personally have always had something of a soft spot for this story ever since I read the original book back in 2nd grade. In fact, I was planning to do an old versus new of this story back in 2021. So why didn't I? Well, I had everything set that year to start my comparison of the best Christmas pageant ever, 1983 versus... Yeah, to my surprise, the 1983 TV special was the only adaptation of the book at the time. I mean, I knew the story wasn't a literary classic or anything, but I had figured it had been adapted at least more than once. But that did not seem to be the case at the time. So when using a live recording of the stage adaptation of the story as the newest for this comparison proved not as practical as I'd hoped. Yeah, that's how much I wanted to do this comparison. I realized I'd simply have to be patient and wait for when or if a second adaptation was released. And in 2024, after 3 years of waiting, my prayer from God was finally answered as a new film was released, directed by the creator of the acclaimed series The Chosen, Dallas Jenkins himself. But there was another slight delay. Since this version would be in theaters, the footage wouldn't be available to be obtained in time for me to do a Christmas review that year. But what was one more year of waiting after 3 already? And when I saw the movie in theaters that year, let's just say it did not disappoint.
But let's just see how it compares to the original 1983 special. At long last, this is old versus new, the best Christmas pageant ever. We're actually not going to be starting with our protagonist or antagonist this time. This time we're going to be starting with our protagonist-antagonist hybrid of sorts. Yeah, it's kind of hard to determine whether the Herdmans count as protagonists or antagonists in this story, but I do know they're the ones you want to hear about first, so they're who we're going to start with. So which ones were not only the most deviant, but had the best character development? Let's find out with Best Herdmans. Like said before, the Herdmans are the Scrooges of our story, consisting of Imogene, Ralph, Leroy, Claude, Ollie, and Gladys. And as horrible as these kids are, you can't help but be a little impressed with just how disturbingly sociopathic they are. I mean, how often do you see a bully go as far as to literally grow a plant in someone's frickin' ear? I mean, boo to them for the action, but I love the innovation these little shirts have. And on top of that, their writing is pretty funny in both movies, especially when Grace is trying to explain to them the nativity story for the first time.
Wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room for them at the inn.
You mean they tied him up and put him in a feed box? Who was the child welfare? The child welfare is at our house every 5 minutes. There wasn't any child welfare in Bethlehem. I'll say there wasn't.
Gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
What's that stuff?
Oils and perfume.
What sort of cheap king hands out oil? You get better presents at the fireman's shelter.
The only major downside, though, is, funny as they are, they all feel pretty interchangeable from each other. Yeah, they all seem to talk, behave, and torment their victims virtually identical to one another, with very little distinguishing traits. I think the only one who's somewhat distinct from the group is Gladys, who's noticeably more hyperactive and little kiddish, for lack of a better word. Please note, though, I did not use the word innocent. This doesn't hurt the story too much, but I do wish Barbara Harrison had put just a little bit more effort in making the Herdmans each unique from each other. But moving on, as to which depiction of the siblings is better on the whole, that's a tough argument. When it comes to which family feels more naturally like juvenile delinquents growing up in horrible living conditions, that would easily be the original. It's clear they regularly bathe in diarrhea with dead rats as a loofah sponge to dry off, and their clothing comes from the stereotypical shady ghetto punk store next to the cocaine dealership behind the back alley on the edge of town. Even the way they talk, even though the kids' acting isn't great, you can still feel a natural intimidation from them, and you can tell they're really trying hard to be Billy Butcher.
I'm gonna stick a pussy so far down your ear where nobody can reach it. It'll sprout there and grow and grow and grow. You'll spend the rest of your life with a pussy well bush growing out of your ear.
The Herdmans in the remake felt a bit too much like normal healthy kids. They look and dress like their family has a suitable income to support 6 kids, and even their acting, while not bad, feels a bit more like your generic kids movie bullies rather than PG-rated junkies. But with that said, despite not having the natural badassery of the original, the remake's Herdmans are much more developed. For one, since this version is longer, it has a lot more time to actually show the misdeeds of the tykes. Yeah, in the original, most of the Herdmans' crimes are just paraphrased in Beth's narration. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the only crimes we actually see on screen is them blowing up a tool shed and they're smoking and drinking. Granted, they probably picked a couple of the most heinous acts to show us, which helps us get a sense of how deviant they are, but the remake actually shows us almost every single one of the Herdmans' misdeeds, be it their lies, their theft, their recklessness, them sneaking into movies without paying for it, and even their smoking and drinking. Yeah, I was 99.9% sure the filmmakers wouldn't be able to get away with that in a 2020s film, but they did, so kudos. But anyway, since film is a visual medium, it's better to show instead of tell, but showing more examples of their crimes is far from the only thing that makes the remake's Herdmans more three-dimensional. In the original book and '83 film, the Herdmans only seem to want to be in the pageant for the sake of trying something new. And no, that's not a bad reason at all, but in the remake, it's clear that, especially with Imogene, the oldest, that they see this as a chance to finally redeem themselves in the town's eyes, and they take this opportunity pretty seriously. Like, we actually see them go to the library to do research on the Christmas story, with a bit of help from Beth. But again, the one who takes us the most seriously is easily Imogene. It's like it finally just started to sink into the kid how much her family was despised by the town.
and we can see her doing her best to persuade her siblings to actually take this seriously and seize this chance to finally do something good.
In the movies we watch, all the actors and actresses get to be someone else. They get to change who they are and live a different life. They can get away from their miserable lives and become someone new. That's what we get to do.
But as everyone starts lambasting she and her siblings, we see Imogen grow more and more insecure and wonder if maybe a trash bag like herself shouldn't have any business playing the mother of Jesus.
Like, compare each of their reactions when Grace tells them they have to use a doll for Jesus this year instead of a real baby, since no sane parent was willing to let Imogen touch their baby with a 39.5-foot pole.
That's better anyway. A doll can't bite you.
Yeah, I know. 'Cause you couldn't get a real one 'cause of me.
No.
Liar, liar, plants for hire.
It eventually gets so bad, she does eventually almost drop out of the pageant.
Yeah, I know that sounds like just the usual third act moping and doping part, but it actually is very effective here, which we'll come back to in the best story round. So which portrayal of the Herdmans is better overall? Well, I don't often do this, but I'm gonna call a tie here. Yeah, I'm usually a only one winner kind of guy, who tries to determine which version of a character handled their unique strengths best on the whole, but I just feel both portrayals of the siblings balance each other out with their strengths and weaknesses, the original feeling more like juvenile delinquents, but the remakes being more fleshed out, not just with their criminal activities, but also with their motivations and why they eventually turn good. Besides, in all honesty, I think giving the point to both is the best way I don't find a plant growing in my ear in a few months, courtesy of the depiction that I stiffed the point.
Point goes to both, making Best Herdmans a tie.
Shazam! Shazam!
Jesus Christ is born.
First of all, there's something I want to clarify here and now. The best Beth, generally speaking, is hands down my own mother. She is a very smart, kind, funny, and compassionate woman who I am forever grateful to have come out of the womb of. You're awesome too, though, Dad. But with that established, who's the best Beth when it comes to our anxious but caring lead, who admittedly is kind of a wet sandwich at times? But then again, Jesus did serve bread and fish together, the latter of which do come out the wet ocean. So let's take a look at Best Beth.
Beth Bradley is the protagonist and narrator of our story, played respectively by Farazuka Bach and Molly Bell Wright, the former of which in her film debut. And as far as Christmas family film leads go, she's honestly not super interesting. I know the idea is that she's the self-conscious worrywart having to deal with not only her mom having the pressure of putting on an esteemed Christmas pageant, but on top of that, one where the worst children on earth are in. But that seems to be almost her entire identity, just stressing and worrying everything will go to hell for this event that's supposed to honor heaven. And yeah, you do feel for her, but she doesn't have many other traits that make her really all that interesting. And on top of that, her acting really isn't that great in either version. That's honestly kind of surprising for Bach, since she'd later give much better performances a few years later, such as Dorothy in Return to Oz or Mildred Hubble in the Tim Curry Worst Witch. But I guess we should cut her some slack since this was her first film role and she didn't have any experience under her belt so far. Plus, the awkward way she delivers the lines does have a bit of cheesy charm to it.
My father is wrong. The Herdmans are the worst kids in the whole history of the world. They lie and steal and smoke cigars, even the girls. Before church was even over, they cleaned out the collection plates, scribbled on the Bibles, and stuck gum all over the pews.
You know, I actually may not have given her performance as Mildred Hubble enough credit. She may not have been as dorky as Georgina Sherrington or Bella Ramsey, but I can see why she landed the part looking back at it. But norm charm and nostalgia aside, I actually think the remake's Beth has a slight advantage. For one, Molly Bell Wright's acting is a tad better. Probably helps that she had much more acting credits under her belt when she did the role, but she does ultimately do a better job at conveying the character's stress and anxiety, so she does make the character more sympathetic overall. But what's even better is, like the Herdmans, this Beth is much more developed. We get a much more in-depth look at her struggles and anxiety. Like in this version, we actually see her praying to the Big G to be with her mom through this and not have the pageant bomb as disastrously as the live-action Snow White remake, something the original Beth never did. And on top of that, we actually see her lose her friend Alice as a consequence of starting to be supportive to the Herdmans. Yeah, whereas the original Beth barely directly interacted with the Herdmans on screen, this version actually has an arc of going from despising the kids as much as everyone else at the beginning. Hell, just listen to what her very first prayer is.
Can you send the Herdmans somewhere far away until I grow up? Somewhere without many people. Maybe an island with no people at all. And violent, dangerous creatures.
To actually beginning to see the good in them, starting from when she helps them get their library cards so they can check out the books they need to research their rules for this pageant. Another thing I like about the new Beth is that she seems more concerned about this predicament for her mom's sake than her own, not just because she actually prays for her mom in this version, but during the third act breakup scene, Beth comes to try and talk some sense into them, not just for their sake since she actually is starting to care about them, but also for her mom's considering all she's done for them thus far.
My mother stood up for you. She fought for you. The town practically hates her for it, but she did it anyway, because she cares about you.
Just a quick heads up, there are many other awesome lines in the scene that we'll come back to in the Best Story round. Plus, Molly's Beth's only actress in this version. Yeah, both versions take different approaches to the whole narrator aspect. Where the original Beth just narrates straight to the camera randomly, the remake takes more of a Christmas Story-like approach and has Beth's older, more cynical self serving as the narrator, voiced by Lauren Graham, aka Sarah Braverman from Parenthood. As enjoyably cheesy as Bach's corny but charmingly inexperienced line delivery is, Lauren Graham pretty much nails capturing the same deadbeat, cynical, sardonic vibe that Gene Shepard did as adult Ralphie.
You usually like playing Joseph?
Elmer hated playing Joseph, but his dad was the minister, so he made him when nobody else volunteered. Nobody else ever volunteered.
I wish there was more I had to talk about with the original Beth, but there was just so little to her. Come to think of it, it's not just the Herdmans she hardly interacts with, we barely see her interact with anyone else either for that matter. Except maybe for her friend Alice, who we'll talk about in the supporting cast round. That's more forgivable in the book since it's told from her third-person perspective, but in film it doesn't translate super well, needless to say. Even though the remake's Beth wasn't an awesome protagonist either, she did still do a better job at executing the stress the character was going through and had more of a connection with the rest of the cast, not just because she interacts with them a lot more, but we also see the actual bond she has with them, like with her mom, and also with the Herdmans as she grows to care about them more. And on top of having a pretty fun actress to play her adult self, it's this Beth I was more interested in seeing being spared from the worst Christmas pageant ever.
Point goes to the new.
It's just gonna be awful, you know.
Here's another thing I want to establish here and now. The best Grace, generally speaking, is hands down my younger sister, who was destined to be a star soccer athlete until an injury in 2016, but even better, was a big part in shaping my sense of humor along with my dad, and also helping me find my nerve. But with that established, who's the best Grace when it comes to the director of the best Christmas pageant ever? Is it Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan from the series MASH, or Miss Desjardins from the 2013 remake of Carrie? Let's find out with Best Grace.
Grace Bradley, the protagonist Beth's mom, the secondary protagonist, and the director of the pageant, is played by Loretta Swit and Jodie Greer respectively. And trust me, you thought Charlie Brown had a hard time being the director of a Christmas pageant? Hey, at least when the kids weren't listening to Chuck, they were at least doing some pretty cool interpretive dancing to a swinging jazz score by Vince Guaraldi. This woman's gotta deal with death threats, 6-year-olds getting drunk, a fire breaking out in church, and having to keep the Herdmans from improvising a showdown between Joseph, the wise man, and Herod. Though I'll admit, I would kind of wanted to see that. Anyway, this one was a bit more difficult to decide since both actresses have their own spin on the character. Even though both do well at playing socially awkward women, Swit seemed more assertive and able to speak up when someone was acting up or giving her bullshit. Jodie Greer, on the other hand, yeah, I can scarcely believe this is the same woman who played Miss Desjardins in the 2013 remake of Carrie, because she's about as assertive and able to speak up as Texas is to Greg Abbott for pretty much pulverizing DEI in schools. Like, compare both versions what each one tells their family after the other moms give her shirt for allowing the Herdmans to snag all the main roles in the pageant.
Helen Armstrong is not the only woman alive who can run a Christmas pageant. I'm gonna make this the best Christmas pageant ever. And I'm gonna do it with the Herdmans.
While Helen Armstrong might be surprised the sun rises every morning even though she's not there to supervise it, she is not the only woman in the world who can run a Christmas pageant.
You said all that?
Not all of it.
Any of it?
Never mind.
So naturally, both feel like apples to oranges when attempting to direct the pageant. While both fail miserably at controlling the Herdmans for much of the story, Swit did at least try to lay down the law on them.
Well, somebody better be here.
No, Imogene, we are going to do the pageant the way it is always done.
Let Charlie be here.
Forget about Herod. There is no Herod.
Judy Greer... yeah, she honestly doesn't have the courage to at least try to control the Tykes.
Gladys, use your angel powers.
No, honey, I don't think we... Please, I need you all to settle down.
Baby Jesus can kill Herod.
So which take is better? Is the one who at least tried to be in control despite failing to do so, or the one without a single assertive bone in her body? Well, again, it was a bit harder to decide which one worked better here, but after a lot of contemplation, I think Judy Greer's take on the character was more interesting. Just imagine having to direct a Christmas pageant that the town is expecting to be Steven Spielberg quality even with the worst kids in town starring in it, added on top of the fact that you are not a born leader in any way whatsoever. Yeah, even though she's trying to keep a positive demeanor, you can tell that this pressure is causing her blood pressure to break the meter. This makes her seem more like a fish out of water and also makes her situation more sympathetic.
That, she honestly just feels like a more dedicated and open person. I'm not saying Loretta Swit was unlikable by any means, but Judy Greer just seemed more philanthropic, shall we say? Remember how I mentioned Grace volunteered to be the director of the pageant? Well, I was actually only half right about that. She only volunteered in the remake, and the original Mrs. Armstrong asked her to, and even though she was willing, she wasn't initially very enthusiastic about it, even before the Herdmans hijacked the show. Even though she was clearly about to tinker her pants when doing so, Greer was still clearly glad to lend a helping hand to her community, and she honestly comes off as a pretty compassionate and loving person, not just to her daughter Beth, who she has a lot of heartfelt conversations with, and holds no grudge against her for not volunteering for Mary to keep Imogene from snagging the part, but also eventually towards the Herdmans. Even if she did initially try to sweet-talk Imogene into withdrawing, she actually is the very first person to start to see their redeeming qualities, even before our main protagonist Beth does. Like, she points out that the Herdmans do kind of have a point that the innkeeper was kind of a jerk to dump a woman in labor to give birth in his barnyard instead of making room for him in his inn, and the hay was probably not as soft and warm as it's made out to be in sermons. Or that the Herdmans did find it an outrage that King Herod wanted to put a newborn baby to death, showing that even they have hearts. Heck, by the middle of the film, she borderline respects the kids when she realizes that they were the only ones willing to help bring this pageant to life with the main roles when all the other kids were too chicken to. I know it's because they didn't want the Herdmans physically assaulting them, but that's beside the point. And when the other parents start twisting the fact about stuff the Herdmans did when they're wrongly accused of setting a fire in the church, more than the best story round, she tells them to shut the fork up and not be biased benches. Loretta Swit didn't seem to have that character development. At best she grew to be amicable with the Herdmans, but she didn't seem to respect them in any way, shape, or form. At least until the end. It honestly kind of felt more like her letting the Herdmans stay and her determination to make this the best Christmas pageant ever was more to stroke her own ego by proving that she could direct a Broadway-worthy show that still had the worst kids in history in it. But Judy Greer honestly says it beautifully why she's letting the kids stay despite everything.
The whole point of the story is that Jesus was born for the Herdmans as much as he was for us. We'd be missing the point of all of it if I turned them away.
And yeah, in case you didn't realize, that's kind of the whole message of the story, which I'm gonna go into way more detail with in the next 2 rounds. But anyway, I hope you all didn't get the impression that Loretta Swit's Grace was a jerk or snob by any means. She still came off as a nice lady, but she honestly didn't have the same level of dedication or compassion that Judy Greer's incarnation had, and topped off with having a more awkward and shy portrayal, which overall worked better for this story. Judy Greer's who I gotta nominate for the best director of the best Christmas pageant ever. Point goes to the new.
Let me tell you.
Tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born.
A church may be able to count on the support of its attendees for tithes and offerings, but Not so much when it comes to the controversial casting of the lead roles in a Christmas pageant. But then again, what isn't considered controversial in the church these days? But anyway, let's make the best of the support we have with Best Supporting Cast.
So, as you may have picked up from what I've discussed already, most of the supporting cast in both versions is really anything but supportive. Come to think of it, that seems to be the case for a lot of films I compare. I wonder why. Well, in this case, it seems to be that most of them are supposed to represent the arrogant priests and Pharisees and scribes that would often look down on Jesus for not looking down on sinners like robbers and tax collectors, instead showing them mercy. Yeah, kinda sounds a bit like our story, doesn't it? I'd say the most prominent of this is Alice Windlekin, Beth's self-righteous best friend, who usually plays Mary in the town's pageant, but was blackmailed by Imogen this year into standing down. And in her defense, Imogen has made good on her threat to grow a pussy willow in someone's ear before. Anyway, she's honestly a great representation of what the Pharisees who encountered Jesus were like. She may be very well versed in her scripture, but she clearly doesn't understand the meaning of said scripture or the love God wants to show us, and acts like she's superior to all her peers because of it, especially the Herdmans. But whereas the original feels more like a somewhat snobby know-it-all, the one in the remake definitely has more of a school queen bee feel to her.
This is why they shouldn't have shown up. Didn't Reverend Hopkins talk about when Jesus said, "Suffer the little children, come unto me"? Yeah, well, Jesus wouldn't have suffered Herdmans.
And like said before, she actually breaks off her friendship with Beth because of her association with the unrighteous Herdmans. This definitely makes her feel like more of a representation of the narcissistic Pharisees that Jesus had to encounter. But where would a self-righteous queen be without her equally condescending mother? Yeah, Mrs. Windlekin gets a similar villain upgrade to her daughter, going from just a slightly condescending busybody housewife with only a few scenes here and there to pretty much Odelia Blight from Owl House without her magic powers, but all her narcissism and sense of superiority.
That's okay, Grace. The pageant is an especially big deal this year. You can bring the cookies, that's your thing.
Bringing the cookies is my thing?
Well, your store-bought brand from last year were so tasty.
Added on top of the fact that she looks a bit like Connie from Stranger Things, who I still wish they had not killed off so early. That show needed more of her cold-blooded benchery. And again, she has a lot more screen time than the original. Putting Grace and her acceptance down in any way she can is probably the closest thing the story has to a straightforward villain. Though I gotta say, there is one line the original makes about Imogen that is pretty cool too.
What kind of a child is that to play Mary, the mother of Jesus? It's sacrilegious!
Speaking of Mrs. Windlekin and the other self-righteous snobby parents, this version makes them even worse by revealing that them not wanting the Herdmans in the pageant may not actually be because they think it's a disgrace to Jesus, but actually because they're afraid it'll hurt the pageant's box office performance. Yeah, you heard that right. This church literally freaking charges for their Christmas pageant, with apparently non-refundable tickets. Yeah, Charlie Brown may be onto something when he's saying Christmas is getting way too commercialized. But anyway, my point is, it seems that they care more about making sure their pockets are loaded than actually delivering the story and message about the birth of our Savior. What about Mrs. Armstrong, the usual director who literally fell down on the job? Her screen time is pretty limited in both versions, but she is still pretty dang memorable.
This is that big bone, tight-ass, control-freak Karen played for laughs that we see in media, and both do well giving Lois Wilkerson a run for her money. Hell, when she was first incapacitated, her biggest concern was adjusting her schedule and finding someone to cover her at the PTA meetings. But I actually like the one in the original slightly better, because she felt a little more obsessive and domineering.
Where did they come from? Who let them in? Where was Reverend Hopkins, I'd like to know?
Same for Beth's little brother, Charlie. Well, actually for kind of opposite reasons, though. The original one just felt a little more adorkable. Unfortunately, though, I can't really qualify Charlie as a helpful side character. He's not an antagonist, but he does literally nothing to help his mom and sister in their predicament. Plus, the kid literally freaking said the best thing about church was there were no Herdmans. Yeah, that's so harsh, no one responds as ecstatically as usual to dissing the Herdmans. But okay, are there any characters who are even remotely useful and supportive to our leads Beth and Grace? Well, Reverend Hopkins is. In the remake, at least. Yeah, whereas after the fire, the original proposes they just cut their losses and cancel the show on account of the fire, since he doesn't think a single person will even bother coming. The one the remake is the only adult who sticks up for Grace when the other adults are dizzing her for not kicking out the Herdmans, which supposedly started this fire.
You're the one who's been doing all the work, not them. If you can tell me this will be fine, I trust you.
Now that is a true loving man of God. And so is Beth's dad, Mr. Bradley, in both movies. Yeah, he is literally the only person in both versions that isn't a self-righteous jerk or completely useless to our leads. Even before seeing the good in the Herdmans, he never really cared for talking smack about them like everyone else, and even pointed out to Charlie that it wasn't very Christian of him to say something so harsh about the Herdmans in church, or in general for that matter. But even though his warm, loving Christian values are well conveyed in both versions, the remake gives him so much more to do. Like, he provides a lot more motivational, spiritual pep talks to his daughter.
There was a man, much wiser than me, that once said you can't add a single hour to your life by being anxious about anything. And that includes putting on a Christmas pageant.
He hadn't met the Herdmans.
He knows them better than anyone.
And I also like how this version combines his character with the social worker who brings the Herdmans their ham and Christmas presents. Really, the only point of the social worker in the book and special was to showcase the dirt poor conditions the Herdmans live in, hence why they have welfare. And said welfare does play a part in the story, which is all I'll say for now. But I honestly think it works so much better to have Beth's dad do this, because seeing how one of the two most important people and role models in her life is willing to show kindness to the Herdmans, and apparently has been doing this for years now, long before the Herdmans even started to show redemption, is a big contributor in helping Beth come to accept them as well. So yeah, this one was pretty one-sided, wasn't it? Even though the original did do two side characters better, they unfortunately weren't relevant enough to the story for that to really matter. The remake did all the prominent side characters, both supportive and antagonistic, a million times better, and that gets my vote. Point goes to the new.
You have my sympathy.
And finally, ladies and gentlemen, the story. We all know that the birth of Jesus is hands down one of possibly the biggest historical events in history, but which story here best tells us attempt to tell the story that started with comedically disastrous results, but ended up succeeding with flying colors? This is Best Story. When it comes to adapting beloved children's books, I think most folks can agree that Hollywood struggles in that department a tad. Not that Hollywood hasn't succeeded with flying colors a lot of times also, but so often the source material lands in the hands of someone who doesn't understand or even have respect for said source material. That's why I was initially hesitant when I first heard about this movie. But then when I heard Hollywood had given the chosen creator Dallas Jenkins this project, my fears were put to rest. And 100% rightfully so, because Jenkins and his crew honestly could not have adapted this story to film more perfectly. For one thing, I love the film doesn't modernize the story like most film adaptations of kids' books do. They cleverly keep the technology, fashion, and dialogue timeless enough to be in almost any time period, could have been present day, or just have likely been the 1972 setting of the original book. Also, kudos for having the the nerve to show kids drinking and smoking really gives a shock value that most film studios are too chicken for in this day and age. But then again, imaging smoking is a plot point that we'll come to later. Okay, so this whole comparison has been a lot more one-sided than usual on the whole, with 3.5 points going to the new so far, and as you may have deduced, new is going to take the victory point. Is it because it's over half the length of the original, and thus has more time to flesh out the characters and plot? Well, yes, but length isn't necessarily a kiss of death to a work being better. You may remember how the originals my comparisons for both Rudolph and The Year Without a Santa Claus both won despite being only half the length of the remakes. Only here, Dallas Jenkins uses the extra runtime of the newer version to legit strengthen many things, like not just giving the side characters more screen time and legit purpose to the story, but also to give much more natural character growth to our main characters. Yeah, in the original book and special, the Herdmans seem to turn good and repent with little to no build-up whatsoever. The most we get is that Imogen was touched by how beautiful a painting of Mary was just before showtime. But here, the Herdmans' desire to change and even the beautiful painting of Mary come much earlier in the story,
and is slowly built upon as the story progresses. We see much earlier that, horrible as they are, the Herdmans aren't pure evil like the general public thinks they are, and honestly don't like being perceived this way. And same goes for our leads, Beth and Grace, who go from being just as flabbergasted as everyone else in the climax to being the first ones to see and appreciate the Herdmans for who they really are. But okay, I know I've mostly just been rehashing what I've said in my previous rounds thus far. What makes the new version better in my opinion overall is that it seems to understand and execute the message of the story much better, not just the learn the true meaning of Christmas premise, but more importantly, that no one is unworthy of being God's children, even folks as slimy as the Herdmans. That's the entire point of why he sent his son to Earth. Part of what makes this message more effective here is having the Herdmans show interest in turning from their sin into God much sooner in the story. Yeah, around the middle, the public more or less stops being scared of the Herdmans and just seems to not want them there because they think they're unworthy for this pageant. Hell, just listen to what one of the staff members says.
I'm playing Mary.
You don't look like any Mary I've seen before.
And I thought the Westboro Baptist Church was cruel. But okay, let's talk more about this fire I've mentioned frequently, but haven't really gone into detail with yet. Basically what happened was, one of the staff saw smoke from the ladies' bathroom and automatically assumed there was a fire and the fire department was called, only there was never actually a fire, it was just Imogene smoking. In the original book and '83 film, this scene was just another zany Herdman mishap to pad out the story, but Dallas Jenkins actually makes a go with the story here. When everyone is blaming the Herdmans for the fire, this is the final straw for Imogene, causing she and her siblings to bail out on the pageant. In most other cases, this would have just been another one of those third act breakup scenes that's supposed to come off as emotional but just comes off as irritating. But here, it honestly works perfectly towards enhancing the drama, because it really helps in showcasing the Herdmans' despair when they actually think they're unworthy of being God's children.
Everyone loves Mary because she's sweet and she's pretty and I'll never be the real Mary. Didn't care what anyone thought of her and did the hard thing, even though it was scary. You're kind of like that, actually.
Though I'm not too sure the cliche of the pep talk initially not appearing to work, but then it does at the very last second was really needed. Nonetheless, the pageant does indeed end up being the best Christmas pageant ever in both versions, thanks to the Herdmans opening up their hearts to Jesus for the first time, bringing much more heart and joy to the show than usual. To Leroy, Claude, and Ollie as the wise men giving the baby Jesus an actual sacrifice of their beloved Christmas ham and welfare presents instead of props of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. To Imogene adding little tidbits like burping the baby Jesus and the joy of the Lord entering her heart, causing her to have tears of joy as well as the audience. And need we forget,
Hey, unto you a child is born. It's Jesus, and he's in the barn. Go on up.
Yeah, the pageant is really well done in both versions, but not only does the new have possibly the most beautiful version of Silent Night ever, but the essence of that holy night is so prevalent in this scene that we literally get cuts to visuals of the night in question. And it's honestly so beautiful and heartwarming. The fact that Jenkins is blatantly trying to subliminally advertise his series The Chosen here is very easy to forgive. And given it manages to impress Mrs. Walker, that's what I call a Christmas miracle. And to clarify, despite being much more one-sided here than usual, the original is not a bad film. It's just that in the original book didn't really go as far as they could have with its premise and characters. This version went all out, thus making for the best version of the best Christmas pageant ever.
Point goes to the new, the best representation of the best Christmas pageant ever.
It's sacrilegious.